On Sunday, March 13, 1977, around 5:30 in the evening, a 17-year-old boy named John Lame informed his nearest neighbor that he was going to nearby Redondo Beach, one of a whole cluster of cities located along the Pacific coast. In Redondo Beach, he was going to see a man he met at a gym in downtown Los Angeles. The new acquaintance's name was Dave, and Happy John went to the meeting, but that evening he never returned home. Early the next morning, John's mother, worried about her son's prolonged absence, called his classmate, who suggested that she contact a certain friend of John's, a man twice his age named Dave, who lived a few miles from their home in Redondo Beach. After calling and not getting a clear answer from this Dave, the woman, who was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, called the El Secunda police, confident that something had happened to her son. She stated that her son did not have a habit of not appearing at home for several days in a row, especially on weekdays when he had to attend school. The police, however, as in all such cases, considered this case another escape of a teenager and offered to wait a little, so that the guy will return home on his own when he gets up. 5 days later, on March 18th, the remains of the homosexual Jonel May were found near the highway south of Corona. He was dismembered into several parts. All parts of his body were washed, drained of blood, and carefully packed into 5 huge garbage bags. Each bag was carefully sealed with nylon tape. 3 bags were squeezed into an empty 300-liter barrel of engine oil, and the other 2 were left lying on the ground next to it. The guy's head was never found, but the birthmark on his body clearly identified the remains as belonging to John Lame. In the future, Patricia Lame will hear more than once the name of Dave, a mysterious acquaintance of her son, which was called to her by a classmate of John. And her son will be the latest victim of the infamous garbage bag murders. The 70s of the 20th century were a rather troubled time for young people, especially for young gay men. The AIDS epidemic has not yet been seen as a serious threat to humanity. Therefore, the popularity of gay baths, gay bars, and anonymous sex in parks, public toilets, and at parties reached a frenzied scale. Gays fought back after many decades of harassment and eventually achieved compliance with the principles that they considered their laws. The era of free love of the 60s ended in the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, which in those years turned into one of the centers of the hippie movement, and in which the famous Summer of Love in the USA took place in 1967 year. And now young people in droves headed from there to California in the Summer of Love, called the Summer of 1967 year, when about 100,000 hippies, acquaintances and strangers gathered in the Haight-Ashbury quarter of San Francisco to celebrate the time of love and freedom, which led to the emergence of a unique, unprecedented phenomenon of cultural, social and political the riot. Golden Gate Park offered free food, free drugs, and free love. A free David Smith Clinic has been opened to provide medical services. She continues her work to this day. And free shops provided an ever-increasing number of hippies with clothing and basic necessities. This love has united many people of different ages and professions. This unprecedented gathering of people is sometimes considered a social experiment, because of the lifestyle that began to be considered the norm in the Summer of Love and spread in subsequent years. It includes life in communes, equal and free distribution of benefits, often with the participation of strangers, the use of psychedelic substances, and free, unlimited love. And now this era has ended. In the quiet 70s, gay teenagers were drawn to California, as if to a kind of Mecca. Unburdened by the cares of adult life, young men ran away from unsympathetic parents, gave everyone the thumbs up, and headed to the promised land. Some of them didn't find what they were looking for. Many of these young men became boys' prostitutes, then they tried to earn their meager existence. According to writer Dennis McDougall, an angel of darkness dedicated to the monstrous crimes of killer Randy Kraft. In the 70s and early 80s, more than 100 young hitchhikers tried to hitch a ride on the streets and highways of Southern California. And they didn't live to tell about it. They were all young, beautiful, and looked boldly into the future, but in the end, they found themselves in a state of deep despair. According to Berkeley psychologist Michael Evans, homosexuals are a group of people who easily gain access to anonymous methods. Chicago Police Sergeant Richard Sandberg said it differently and much more simply and intelligibly. Gays are the easiest prey. Hitchhiking has never been a safe way to travel. But in the 1970s, a car ride with a stranger was frighteningly commonplace. The maniacs cruised along the freeway exits and the beach highway. Perverts often visited bars, hoping to find young guys in high spirits. Sometimes they were looking for money, sometimes fast sex without commitment, sometimes they wanted to take out their frustration and rage on an outsider, unsuspecting person. Although, according to statistics, homosexuals make up only about 5% of serial killers, it is this category of maniacs that is most prone to excessive cruelty in murders. Their heterosexual counterparts. They carry out the most horrific tortures, inflict monstrous injuries on victims, and most often resort to dismemberment. Recall, for example, the cases of William Bonin, Randy Kraft, or Dennis Nilsen, and their methods of torture, and subsequent methods of disposing of bodies. Detailed analyses of their personalities and crimes have already been released earlier on the channel. Homosexuals are also among the most prolific serial killers. Here you can recall the same Bonin, Kraft, and Nilsen. The perverse enormity of their crimes is a kind of grotesque mirror of the free sexual lifestyle that many gays adhered to in the era preceding the beginning of the mass spread of AIDS in the 1970s. The question of why homosexual serial killers as a category of criminals show special sadistic tendencies is an extensive topic for discussion, says author Harold Schechter in his book Dossier Serial Killers. One of the answers to this question is undoubtedly the prevailing homophobia in American society, because of which many homosexuals grow up with a deep-rooted sense of guilt and self-hatred. Inside themselves, they are even more homophobic. When these feelings are combined with the psychopathology of a serial killer, and the result is especially terrifying. The FBI estimates that there are still 10 to 50 serial killers at large in the United States. Our hero today, or rather the anti-hero, Patrick Wayne Kearney, was born in Los Angeles on the 24th of September 1939th year and subsequently lived in Texas. He was the eldest of 3 sons in the family and was brought up in a fairly prosperous environment. At least, if this environment is compared with the families of other famous maniacs. However, as a child, he could not avoid psychological trauma. In September 1944, at the age of 5, he went to school in Montebello. And, being a thin and sickly child, he became the main target for bullies. As a result, already in adolescence, he began to fantasize about killing people. At school, he was often called a faggot, despite his obvious interest in girls. At the age of 8, he knew for sure that in the future he would kill people in 1950, when Patrick was 11 years old. His parents moved to the California city of Reseda. In a new school, where bullying by classmates has only intensified. Patrick's fantasies about the murders have moved into the most active stage. These fantasies seem to him very detailed. He became withdrawn and cherished dreams of killing his personal enemies. In addition, he has divorced sexual fantasies related to domination. In addition, he began to engage in bestiality when he was 13 years old. Perhaps his father George contributed to the development of this tendency, because it was he who showed his eldest son how to slaughter pigs. You need to shoot them in the head, behind the left ear. The boy will remember this method for the rest of his life, and later he will use it more than once. Patrick really enjoyed taking the lives of animals. He enjoyed being surrounded by blood and guts. In the winter of 1954 year, 14-year-old Patrick entered high school, where he was also bullied by classmates. The family then moved to Wilkes, Arizona. And in the same year, he had to change schools again after the family moved, this time to Redondo Beach, California. In every school, Patrick was attacked again and again by his peers. In 1957 year, 17-year-old Patrick Kearney graduated from high school. And his family moved now to the city of Houston, Texas. Here Patrick lived with his parents for a short time, and in the same year, decided to return to California, where he entered El Camino College the following year. Having reached adulthood, Kearney joined the U.S. Air Force and was sent to Texas for basic military training. The following year, still there in Texas, he met a man named David Hill, who was 3 years younger than Kearney. For both of them, it was love at first sight. And a little later, they started dating in 1961. Kearney was discharged from the Army, and together with David Hill, he moved to Long Beach, California. David Hill was born and raised in Lubbock, Texas. He was a huge guy with a height of almost 190 centimeters. After he was kicked out of school in 1960, he joined the Army, but almost immediately was demobilized. With a diagnosis of personality disorder without further clarification, returning to Lubbock, he married his school sweetheart. But Hill's marriage was short. He divorced and returned to Kearney. According to another version, Hill and Kearney met in 1962 year, when Patrick was doing military service. Hill divorced his wife in 1966 year. And a year later, he moved to California with Kearney. During this period of time, Kearney allegedly also managed to get married and divorced. Kearney and Hill were living together in Culver City, a suburb of Los Angeles, when the long string of murders began. The exact biographies of both young people are still unknown. Therefore, both versions of the development of events have the right to exist. According to the first version, Hill allegedly moved out of Kearney in 1962, intending to hitchhike half of the country. That's when he met his future wife Linda. However, their family life did not work out. Meanwhile, Patrick attended lectures on history at California State University in Long Beach. At this time, he decided to experience for the first time this incomparable sensation that he had dreamed of for so long: to kill a person. He picked up guys in bars, at bus stops, in gay places, looking for a quick hookup in the bushes. These guys were easy to find, easy to kill, and also easy to dispose of the bodies by dumping them in the desert. It was thanks to his experience of the first years spent in California that Kearney developed his skills as a gay pickup artist. Patrick usually looked for partners in San Diego and Tijuana, Mexico, where he used his fluency in Spanish, and showed great interest in Latin American culture, which he took as a basis for communicating with potential sexual partners. Kearney himself claimed to have killed his first victim in the spring of 1962, when he was 22 years old. The name of this victim has remained unknown. That day, he invited a 19-year-old boy to ride a motorcycle with him. And when he agreed, Kearney took him to a deserted place, shot him in the head, raped, and then mutilated his corpse. The second victim, killed in the same 1962 year, was a 16-year-old cousin of the first victim. He allegedly saw his older brother leaving with Kearney before disappearing. Then Patrick took him to the same place, shot him in the head, and raped the body. In the same year, 1962, Kearney killed his third victim, an 18-year-old guy named Mike, as in the first two cases. He shot him in the back of the head and raped his corpse. A little later, Hill returned to California, and he and Kearney decided to move in together. Hill was not divorced yet. And already in August of the same 1962 year, Kearney finally got a job as an engineer at the Hughes Aircraft Company, and in April 1963 year, he was promoted to senior researcher. In 1964, Kearney and Hill moved to Culver City, California. And only 2 years later, in 1966, David Hill decided to divorce Linda. In June 1967, Patrick suggested that David go on vacation to Mexico, where Kearney met an old acquaintance named George. According to Kearney, he lured the victim into his car in San Diego and then drove to his home. As soon as George crossed the threshold of the house, Kearney shot him in the head. Then he dragged the body into the bathroom, where he raped him, then tore off his skin, and dismembered him in the bathtub with a knife in the Exacto company. Kearney then removed the bullet from the victim's head to cover his tracks. After that, he buried the dismembered body behind his garage. After committing this murder, Kearney did not kill for more than a year, primarily because of fears that law enforcement agencies would investigate George's disappearance and come out to Patrick. Many years later, the identity of this victim has not been established, except for her name. In December 1969, 29-year-old Patrick Kearney acquires a house for a rather impressive sum of $20,750 at that time. The house is located in Redondo Beach, where the bulk of his murders will subsequently take place. Although at the time of acquaintance between Patrick Kearney and David Hill there was a violent passion, and love at first sight happened, their 10-year life together managed to bring both ups and downs. The couple often began to quarrel. Because of this, Hill began to disappear for a few days from home and spend this time with his friends. Or he could have had a fleeting affair and gone on a one-night date as revenge for the insults caused by his roommate Patrick Kearney. David was leaving for his parents' house in Lac. But every time he was pulled back like a magnet, and he came back. When Hill left home, Kerr's impotent frustration didn't reach boiling point. He knew of only one remedy that could satisfy his sense of suppressed rage. Every time after a quarrel with Hill, Kearney went to wander around the neighborhood. He would get behind the wheel of his Volkswagen Beetle or van and go pick up hitchhikers or shoot young people in gay bars. Being a thin man, he had an infallible method of pacifying his victims. Without warning, he shot them in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. Sometimes he drove along the highway, strictly observing the speed limits, keeping his left hand on the steering wheel. And then with his right he shot exactly at the head of his victim, who was sitting in the passenger seat. He wasn't a sadist and didn't hurt his victims like the other two freeway killers Randy Kraft and William Bonin did. Instead, he valued speed and efficiency. Although Kearney later admitted that he still mutilated the bodies of his victims several times out of curiosity, for example, he ripped open their bellies. He noted that he did this only after the death of a person, so as not to cause physical suffering to the victim. Then he drove around until he found a suitable secluded place where he could get rid of his frustration, vent his rage, and show all his strength. As soon as he was alone with the corpses, he undressed them and had sex with them. Yes, Patrick Kearney was also a necrophile, and many other gay maniacs. He then used a hacksaw and cut the bodies of his victims into pieces. If he was at home, he did it in the bathroom, thoroughly washing every part of the body and draining the blood from it, so that this part did not emit any odors. He left no fingerprints or traces of dried blood. He learned all these ways of effectively disposing of bodies by carefully reading about the infamous crimes of Dean Corll, who killed 17 young men in Houston, and subsequently wrapped their bodies in garbage bags and buried them. Kearney studied Corll's heinous crimes and collected newspaper clippings until news of his torture and murder brought the story to a brutal conclusion. When one of the accomplices killed Corll with his own gun. By the way, Odinic Corll's crimes were also analyzed in detail on the channel. Most of Kearney's victims reminded him of people who had caused him trouble in childhood and adolescence. Blonde and arrogant boys. Often, after Kearney killed his victims and finished having sex with their corpses, he also beat them up. However, Patrick Kearney was not the only one who killed young people in Southern California at that time. Hillside Stranglers Angelo Buona and his equally psychopathic cousin Kenneth Bianchi plied their trade in the same area as Kearney, and abducted young girls, tortured them, strangled them, and dumped their bodies in various areas of the state of California. The famous and still unidentified Zodiac Killer was at large, mocking the police and spreading terror with his spontaneous murders. During the crimes called zebra murders by the police, criminals hacked people to death with machetes in broad daylight, right on the busy streets of San Francisco. And, of course, Randy Kraft stood out among them as one of the craziest gay killers in history. In addition, he is also remembered for his incomprehensible sadistic methods of torture. William Bonin and his friend Vernon Batts also committed heinous murders of young gay men and dumped their remains along freeways. No wonder the police were confused. They didn't know how many serial killers they had in total and how many of them were copycat serial killers. But as the number of victims increased, they noticed some tangible differences in the methods of action. One killer, later identified as Randy Kraft, regularly picked up gay hitchhikers, Marines, or other young men he liked. Then he drugged them, tortured them for hours, and eventually castrated, and stuffed everything that came to hand into their rectum. A broom handle, a tree branch, socks, the victim's own genitals or underwear. He usually did this while the victim was still alive and was making heart-rending screams. William Bonin strangled his victims with a rope cord or with the help of a t-shirt, a victim, and a tire iron. And then he raped the corpses and threw the bodies on the side of the road. But one killer stood out from the rest by diligently dismembering his victims, cleaning their bodies and carefully putting them in bags. The press called these crimes murders in garbage bags. And the police investigating these cases referred to them among themselves as the murder of queers in bags. In June 1971, David Hill left Kearney again, leaving only a note for him. This note exasperated Patrick so much that he decided to take revenge and vent his anger on someone. On the 26th of June, he stopped by the side of the road and offered to bring 13-year-old John Demchick. When he got into the car, Kearney shot him in the head, after which he disposed of the body. Over time, Kearney significantly improved his modus operandi, which allowed him to commit his crimes much more efficiently and more often. According to experts, since 1974, Kearney committed murder almost monthly. Picking up your victims on freeways or in gay bars in your Volkswagen or truck. Kearney used to shoot unsuspecting youths in the head with a Derringer .22 caliber pistol which he held in his right hand, while driving with his left hand. Before making a shot, he did not forget to monitor the speed of the car, so as not to show unusual behavior to a potential witness. After killing his victims, Kearney left the bodies in the passenger seat in a strictly vertical position, and drove to a secluded place to rape them. After copulating with the corpses of his victims, Kearney usually mutilated and dismembered the remains with a hacksaw, and then discarded them in various places, such as canyons, landfills, and highway verges, having previously packed the remains in large garbage bags. In some cases, Kearney dumped the bodies in the desert, where they could be eaten by carrion-eating animals. Kearney sometimes drained the victim's blood to eliminate the smell, and also sometimes washed body parts before throwing them away to minimize traces of dried blood and get rid of fingerprints. Kearney then beat his victims when they were already dead. He perceived beating his victims as a cleansing exercise and a means by which he could effectively vent his suppressed anger and gain a sense of power. After all, very often his victims were very similar to the abusers who mocked Keir in childhood. On September 22, 1973, Kearney shot 17-year-old hitchhiker James Fletcher Barwick in the back of the head. Although Kearney mainly preyed on young men, there are also known victims among children and adolescents. Kearney's youngest victim was 5-year-old Ronald Dean Smith, who disappeared in Lenox, California, on August 24, 1974. His body was discovered in Riverside County on October 12, 1974. Cause of death: strangulation. 8-year-old Honda Chance from Viennes disappeared on the 6th of April, 1977th year. It is assumed that he was riding a bicycle near Kearney's place of work. Kearney subsequently claimed that he strangled the boy, took his body home at night, raped him, and then disposed of the remains in the Angeles National Forest, near the Angeles Crest Highway. The decomposed remains of Chance were discovered a month and a half later, on May 26, 1977. April 13, 1974. Patrick Kearney took off a 21-year-old prostitute named Albert Rivera on a San Diego street. As soon as he got into the car, Kearney shot him in the head, then took the body to his home, where he raped, cut it into pieces, packed it in several garbage bags, and later scattered them in different places. The police failed to collect all the fragments of the victim's body entirely. October 31, 1975. Kalesia Paranda Beach in search of a victim. Patrick put a 20-year-old hitchhiker named Larry Gene Walters in his car. Under some pretext, he took him to his home, where he killed, raped the corpse, and then dismembered it, put the remains in garbage bags, and threw them in different places. The remains of the guy were found 10 days later. November 10th. Once, driving around Pardon de Beach, Kearney noticed a young man who was trying to fix his broken motorcycle. He drove up to him and offered to give him a lift. The young man agreed. It turned out to be 17-year-old Robert Benefil. As soon as the guy was in the car, Kearney shot him in the back of the head, took the body to his home, raped the corpse, dismembered, and threw the remains in several different places, having previously packaged the body parts in garbage bags. The remains of the young man were discovered in the autumn of 1976 year. On the 1st of March, 1976, Patrick met a 17-year-old loner named Kenneth Eugene Buchanan in the same Redondo Beach. According to the old scheme, he put him in the car, started driving, and then suddenly shot him in the back of the head. Kearney began to rape the corpse, but it turned out that Kenneth was alive and woke up. Then Kearney shot him 3 more times. The body of the young man was discovered on the 7th of April of the same year. On March 21, 1976, Kearney picked up 13-year-old Oliver Peter Molitor on the road. He pretended to be a doctor, which greatly excited Kearney, and they had sex. Subsequently, Kearney shot the guy, cut his body into pieces, packed it in garbage bags, and dumped them in the Palo Verde Mountains. The remains could not be found. On April 18, 1976, Kearney met 15-year-old Larry Ardaris on the street. In the car, he shot him in the back of the head, then took the body to his home, raped, dismembered, and disposed of it in the already known way. On June 16, 1976, Kearney killed 13-year-old Michael Craig McGee of Redondo Beach. The records confirmed that McGee had been a juvenile delinquent for a long time. Kearney claimed to have picked up McGee, who was hitchhiking to Torrance. According to police, Kearney struck up an acquaintance with the guy and invited him to go hiking on Lake Elsinore over the weekend. Kearney claimed that he perceived McGee as a potential threat and shot him without warning. After McGee began to brag about his criminal exploits and inquired about the presence and location of an alarm system in Kearney's house. Later, during an interrogation by detectives, Kearney hinted that he got rid of the remains of this young man without leaving any traces, and no one would be able to find them. On June 20, 1976, Patrick Kearney shot and killed 23-year-old John Woods in Los Angeles. His body will be discovered exactly 1 year later. On June 21, 1977, around the same time Kearney will meet 19-year-old Tony Stewart. Further details of this acquaintance could not be found out. However, it is known that this young man became the only survivor in the case of murders in garbage bags. In the summer of 1976 year in Redondo Beach, Kearney met and offered to bring 17-year-old Larry Espy. Like most of the other victims, Kearney shot him in the back of the head while driving. After that, he raped his corpse, dismembered it into small pieces, packed them in garbage bags, and threw them away. The remains of the poor man will be discovered on the 23rd of August, 1976 year. Interestingly, throughout the series of murders, Kearney's strange tendencies remained almost unnoticed. However, A grocery store owner named Jerry Stevens noticed that Cyrus did not often visit his store, looked at butcher knives, and was interested in the quality of their steel, and then bought them. Stevens described Kearney as an eerily intimidating loner. At the same time, Patrick Kearney's boss at Hughes Aircraft called his subordinate a model employee in August of 1976 year. Kearney picked up a 20-year-old hitchhiker Wilfred Lawrence Fiardy on the side of the road, after which he shot him in the back of the head. The body of the young man was discovered on the 28th of the same month. In August of that year, 1976, Kearney met 16-year-old Randall Lawrence Moore in San Diego. As soon as the guy was in Kearney's car, Kearney shot him in the head. Moore's body was found on October 10th of the same year. On September 15, 1976, Kearney made the acquaintance of a 19-year-old young man named Timothy Bryan Alm. Patrick took him to his house. While Alm was sleeping, Kearney shot him in the back of the head. He threw the body into a ravine and gave the guy's personal belongings to his friend from Mexico. Ingham's body will be found in 10 days on September 24, October 5, 1976. Kearney shot 20-year-old hitchhiker Mark Andrew Orrock in the head, whose body will be discovered the next day. In a similar way, he dealt with David Allen, whose body was found on the side of the road on October 9, 1970. There will be no murders in garbage bags in this prolific for a maniac in 1976 year. The first victim of 1977 year will be a 28-year-old gigolo named Nicolas Hernandez Jimenez. Cyrus won't shoot it in Los Angeles. And then they will be shot. Most likely, they will rape the corpse, dismember it, pack the remains in garbage bags, and throw them away in different parts of Los Angeles County. His remains will be found on January 23, 1977. By the way, Hernandez Jimenez will be the oldest of all Kearney's victims. On February 26, 1977, Patrick Kearney met 24-year-old Arthur Romas Marquez in Los Angeles. When they agreed to go on a trip, and the young man got into the car, Kearney shot him, raped his corpse, and dismembered him. Arthur's remains will be discovered on the 3rd of March, 1977 year. The penultimate victim, which eventually led to Kearney's arrest, was 17-year-old Jonas LeMay, whom he killed on Sunday, March 13, 1977. As already mentioned at the very beginning, at about 17:30 of the same day, LeMay told a neighbor that he was going to Redondo Beach to meet a man named Dave, whom he met at a local gym. In fact, it was David Hill who gave LeMay the address of Kearney's house. Hill was not at home when LeMay arrived, so Patrick Kearney, who opened the door, invited him to watch TV and wait until Hill returned. As soon as the guy crossed the threshold, Kearney, without any obvious reason, impulsively grabbed a gun and shot LeMay in the back of the head. After that, Kearney had sex with the corpse of a young man, after which he dismembered it, packaged the remains in garbage bags, and threw them away. In fact, the last known victim of Kearney was an 8-year-old boy named Merle Chance, whom Kearney strangled on April 6, 1977. This was told a little earlier, but it was the murder of John LeMay that finally made it possible to find and neutralize the maniac. Some experts say that serial murders are an addiction. As soon as maniacs start killing, sometimes their first murder happens accidentally, without any intention. They are so imbued with this idea that they begin to pursue perverted sexual fantasies, which in turn cause a desperate search for victims. This leads to brutal murders followed by murderous sexual fantasies. This surge is followed by a period of cooling down and returning to a normal daily routine. With all his unbearable stresses, disappointments and resentments, which return the maniac to the newly emerging need to start fantasizing about murder again. According to Canadian writer Peter Vronsky, author of Serial Killers from A to Z, History, Psychology, Methods of Murder and Motives. If the murder cycle of a maniac is started, it can rarely be interrupted. Over time, having started this cycle of addiction, serial killers become more and more insane, and the purity and cruelty of their murders grow exponentially, until they're either caught or they burn out. That is, until the serial killer reaches a point where killing ceases to satisfy him, and he will decide to stop this series of deaths on his own, if nothing else has previously prevented his murderous career. For example, some of the maniacs commit suicide, while others commit related crimes, which they fall for, or even voluntarily surrender to the police. A study of 326 American male serial killers in the period from 1800 to 1995 years, and showed that 87% of them killed at least one stranger, and 70% killed, in principle, only strangers. The most prolific serial killers tend to be the most organized. They methodically track down their victims in search of the best opportunity to strike without being noticed, and deftly dispose of the body in the most unobvious and inaccessible places so as not to leave any evidence. Although, in principle, absolutely anyone can become a victim of a maniac, as authors James Allen Fox and Jack Levine say in their book The Desire to Kill, the victims still tend to be the most vulnerable members of society: children, prostitutes, and the elderly. Or, as in the case of a series of murders in garbage bags, teenagers, runaway hitchhikers, and homosexuals. But the most striking and intriguing aspect of the personality of serial killers is the nature of their motivation. They need to satisfy a strong thirst for power and sadism. A serial killer tends to kill not for lack of love, money, or revenge, but just for fun, because it gives him an impossible pleasure, akin to an orgasm. As you know, John Lamey's mother Patricia literally put the police on their ears. Therefore, her son was searched much more actively than the other victims, because John Lamey told his neighbor that he was going to meet a guy named Dave in Redondo Beach. The police equated this name with a name that regularly appeared on registration sheets in gay baths. And soon the chain of evidence led the police to the door of the modest home of lovers 37-year-old Patrick Kearney and 34-year-old David Hill of Redondo Beach. Kearney and Hill greeted the police officers and looked quite relaxed. They seemed to be seriously concerned about the story of the missing guy Johnny Lamey and looked completely innocent of this case. At a subsequent interrogation in April, Kearney and Hill signed an affidavit stating that they had both been in a homosexual relationship with Lamey for the past 2 years. On the 19th of March, 1977, investigators again came to the house of Kearney and Hill, this time to conduct a search. While inside the house, investigators took several carpet fibers because similar fibers got on nylon tape, which was used to seal garbage bags in which the remains of one of the victims were found. However, in addition to the fibers, samples of the pubic hair of both men were taken, as well as samples of their dog's fur. The police found a metal hacksaw with a fresh, clean cloth, at the corners of which, however, small fibers of fabric were stuck, and traces of blood were visible. It was also decided to take this hacksaw for analysis. The couple did not show any suspicions this time either, and she was ready to cooperate, which dispelled any doubts among the police about their involvement in the crimes. The analysis of the evidence showed that the fibers were identical to those found at the crime scene. But who knows how many more similar carpets have been sold in the USA? This turned out to be extremely insufficient to bring any charges against the men. However, with pubic hair and fur, the result was exactly the same. All of them corresponded to the evidence left on the body of Lamy, the last victim. A blood test found on a metal hacksaw revealed that it corresponded to Lamy's blood type. But when the police decided to return to the suspect's house for the third time, on May 19, exactly 2 months after the first visit, this time with a warrant for another search, the couple had already disappeared. Hughes Aircraft, where Patrick Kearney worked, reported that on May 20th he received the last paycheck, and on May 26th, he notified the management by mail that he was quitting and sent his pass. It turned out that the lovers wrote a letter to Kearney's grandmother to sell their house and pay their bills. Sometimes it can be difficult for a criminal not to be tempted by a good campaign. In particular, victims' families use public relations as a tool to obtain information from the public and exert pressure on the investigating authorities. Tearful press conferences like those held by the families of Lacey Peterson, Natalie Holloway, and Brooke Wilberger. They kept the focus not only on the stories of their families, but also kept the local police in suspense. TV shows like America's Most Wanted turned citizens into couch detectives. Reward announcements, such as those posted by families, tend to attract the attention of viewers, resulting in greater awareness of the population, and, as a result, it reduces the number of places where the killer can hide. For example, the Hillside Stranglers Crime Investigation Task Force was conceived as a means of public relations. The Los Angeles Police Department, having taken serious measures to reassure the public, created a special working group, which included investigators from the Glendale Police Department and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office. It's not like they always have new information on the case. But the thing was that in the busy bustle, and press conferences were watched on television. And the photos were posted on literally every corner. On June 3, 1977, when the heat hit, Kearney and Hill fled to El Paso, Texas. But they knew that life on the run was not the right decision for them. Arrest warrants have been issued for Patrick Kearney and David Hill. Their house was searched again. The police found remnants of blood all over the bathroom. They were not visible to the naked eye because the bath was well washed. However, the criminologists found these traces without much difficulty. They also found a familiar nylon ribbon. And a search of Kearney's office at Hughes Aircraft has finally shed light on where the garbage bags that were used in more than 20 murders of young people came from. The police knew exactly who and exactly where they should look. At the insistence of their relatives, the couple returned to California and at 13 hours and 30 minutes. On the 1st of July, 1977th year, Patrick Kearney and David Hill voluntarily reported to the Riverside County Sheriff's Office. They pointed to the wanted poster, on which their photos were printed, and said, "This is us." The sheriff announced that they have the right to remain silent, but they will greatly help the investigation if they decide to voluntarily confess to all crimes. They were charged with 2 murders. Bail was set at $500,000 each. When both men were brought to court, their hands were handcuffed, and each wore a bulletproof vest under their clothes, so that they would not be accidentally killed by someone from the crowd of onlookers. On July 14th, Kearney confessed to the murders of Albert Rivera, Arthur Marquez, and John Lamy. And the next day he confessed to killing 25 more people. Kearney decided to cooperate fully with the police. He said the murders excited him and gave him a sense of dominance. The idea of hurting someone and killing them sounded sexually arousing. When officers questioned him about whether he had picked up Marines and whether he had drugged his victims with pills and booze, he looked at them with a blank, uncomprehending look. The police insisted, wanting to know if he had ever inserted anything other than his penis into the rectum of his victims. According to Kearney, he used towels to prevent blood splashes and body particles from flying all over the bathroom, and then dismembered them. The police insisted on their own, hoping to solve even more murders that occurred along California freeways. What about torture? Did he stick anything in the tub with just for fun? Patrick Kearney began to guess whose crimes the investigators wanted to pin on him. And in response, he just shook his head. "I don't poke Venice branches," he said. He understood the detectives' desire to solve as many brutal murders as possible. But torturing, strangling, and torturing his victims was not his style. Putting a bullet in the head was much easier and more effective. Patrick Kearney seemed offended to be confused with Randy Kraft, another freeway killer. The investigation of the garbage bag murders officially began on April 13, 1975, when the body of 21-year-old Albert Rivera from Los Angeles was found. The body was found near Highway 74 east of San Juan Capistrano in a sturdy garbage bag. But, according to Kearney, in a series of letters with confessions and conversations with the police, the murders began much earlier, in the mid-60s in Tijuana and San Diego. He led the police to the place where he buried one of his first victims, who was known only as George. The body was buried behind Hill and Kearney's home in Culver City. The victim was killed around the Christmas period of 1968. The police dug where Kearney pointed out and found a skeleton with a single bullet hole in the skull. After George's murder, the paranoid Kearney lay low for more than a year. During this time, not a single policeman called him for questioning. And he realized that he really managed to escape punishment for murder. Kearney's neighbor later said that from time to time she heard, in her opinion, shots. But I had no idea that they were coming from Kearney and Hill's apartment. After his arrest, Kearney wrote confessions to the police, detailing his crimes, the names of the victims, and the places where their bodies could be found. The 18th murder was registered on the same day that Kenneth Bianchi and Angela Buna's cousins were found. However, let's return to John Lamy, with whom the story began. Hill was not at home when his young lover came to his house. So Kearney invited the guest to come in to watch TV. For no reason, Kearney shot Lamy in the back of the head, and later dumped his remains in the desert. He liked to use the endless desert for this purpose. Animals and insects of these places quickly and efficiently destroyed evidence. Things disappear very quickly in the desert, he told investigators. You can put a small animal on an anthill, and it will disappear right before your eyes. According to author Dennis McDougall, one day during one of the trips to the desert to get rid of the body, Kearney had a flat tire. When he found that the spare tire was also lowered, he had to call a tow truck to take the car to the service station. Cyrus didn't stand around sweating while the mechanic changed the wheel, never once asking about the bags in the back seat, which contained the arms, legs, chest, and some intestines of Kearney's last victim. Another time, he locked the keys in the car, inspecting possible landfills for the disposal of the body. It took him several hours to crack the lock with a hanger, all the while looking nervously over his shoulder, and again there were freshly filled garbage bags in the back seat. However, as soon as he managed to throw the bags away, he immediately felt great relief, satisfaction, and was filled with strength. After listening to Kearney's lover David Hill's 3-hour explanation, a Rivers County grand jury declined to indict him. Public defender Malcolm McMillan got him out of jail under a cloak of secrecy to protect him from reporters and photographers. Hill fled California and returned to Lubbock. Riverside District Attorney Byron Morton said the evidence against Mr. Hill was weak, adding that much of the information discovered by Riverside researchers tended to exonerate Hill. McMillan said he was not surprised that the grand jury declined to indict Hill, adding that in his opinion, there was not enough evidence to force him to appear before the Supreme Court. Kearney said Hill was not involved in the murders and knew nothing about them. He told investigators that he committed all the murders alone, while Hill was not at home. It turns out that Kearney took all the blame, relieving an innocent person of responsibility. Or was he trying to protect his lover? Could it be that Hill was also involved in this series of murders? Against the advice of his lawyer, Patrick Kearney changed his statement of innocence to a guilty plea. His lawyer advised him not to plead guilty by reason of insanity. But Kearney pleaded guilty to the original 3 murder charges and asked to be sentenced immediately, apparently trying to avoid the death penalty in California. His actions looked controversial. The law on the death penalty came into force only in August of 1977 year. All of Kearney's murders took place much earlier than that time, so the death penalty could not in principle be applied to this criminal. On December 21, 1977, for the murder of 3 people, Supreme Court Judge John Hughes sentenced Patrick Kearney to 3 life sentences, with the possibility of applying for parole 7 years after the start of imprisonment. Judge Breckenridge said, "This defendant has definitely committed a number of terrible and unthinkable crimes. I can only hope that the Community Release Board will never release Mr. Kearney. It seems that he is an insult to humanity." At a subsequent trial in February of 1978, out of 32 unproven murders, Cyrus was eventually charged with 18 murders and sentenced to a total of 21 life sentences. Patrick Kearney has fully admitted his guilt in each murder. If all his confessions were true, he also killed 2 children aged 5 and 8, as well as 4 victims whose bodies have never been found. At least 7 of his victims remain unidentified. Thus, the exact number of his victims is unknown and ranges from 32 to 43. Patrick Kearney is serving his life sentence in California today. He writes essays, some of which have been published. Garbage bag murders are considered one of the most heinous crimes of the 20th century. In terms of the number of murders, the maniac Patrick Kearney can stand on a par with such serial killers as Jerry Brutus, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Wayne Gacy. As of the beginning of 2024 year, 84-year-old Patrick Kearney continues to serve his sentence in the Mule Creek State Prison. According to Los Angeles Police Homicide Squad Sergeant L. Seth, if Kearney hadn't been so careless, he probably would still be doing this horror.